Is there any reason the fan's not on me? I mean, there was once a man who discovered a wondrous kingdom he could visit and came to realize that while there, if he thought anything critical, he'd find himself immediately back home. Then after even more visits, came to see that almost any thought he'd think would do the same to him. What a spot! The one vacation land from which you cannot send anyone a card, including yourself, saying anything about the place. There was once a race who pictured the source of all man's problems not as a satanic figure with a tail and pitchfork, but rather a glue salesman. A man who thinks of consciousness as that everyday state of him being mentally dragged along by the thoughts forever passing through him has no idea what we're talking about here. Things are naturally arranged so that the sick look after the sick, the weak look after the weak, and the dumb look after those who don't know, while the few look to no one for anything. They can't, for there is no one to look to. To live in the hopes and dreams of the routine mind is to be a fish who believes that someday the water will set him free from the ocean's grasp. The voice of one transcendental travel organization gave the following 7 lectures to a group of interested listeners. On Monday, his address was, quoting, "Without desire, this thing does not exist." Then on Tuesday said, "Without a need, this is all imaginary." Then on Wednesday, his speech was, "Without some knowledge, this does not exist." Then on Thursday, his comments were, "Without strength, this is all illusion." And then came Friday, he said to them, "Without determination, this thing is not." Then on Saturday, "Without luck, this thing never succeeds." And finally on Sunday, wrapped up the week by saying, "Without all of the things that I have mentioned, the journey you long for cannot come to pass. These things I can tell you about, but I cannot within you implant them. You're either born wanting to travel or else you are not, and no amount of lecturing thereon will change the situation one bit." This obviously concluding what he had to say, the crowd began to break up, with but a few lingering on left with any desire to ask for brochures. A man who accepts consciousness to be that everyday condition of him being mentally dragged along by whatever thoughts are forever passing through him will never sense any benefit in trying to change the situation. The reason that all causes, political, religious, social, and so on, must be so passionate and vociferous to just survive is because all human causes are without any indispensable basis. A fever pitch seems necessary when the fever that you're pitching is illusionary. Corollary for cuties. Anything that must be sold to you is never exactly what you thought it was once you get it home. There are some things that an awakened man knows that he can never say to anyone, including himself. One adventurer recently commented, "Things have become clearer, much clearer than I ever imagined they could be, and much simpler also. The man deserves a silent but rousing cheer of good show." As regards the battle, you can tell a man's level of consciousness by the size of the opposition he believes he faces. If it numbers more than one, well, there you are. As regards telecommunications, It's easier to see thoughts for what they really are if you disconnect your phone from general service. No one can tell you how life is supposed to be. Life is how you find it to be. Hence the continuing popularity of religion with its claims of extra systemic explanations. Criticism and advice are an absolutely necessary link in man's mental food chain, but provide less than zero nourishment for those seeking their own individual condition of consciousness. A bee in the hive never digs the jive. A father once told a son, "In this family, there are some things we do not talk about." And the boy asked, "What things?" And the elder replied, "Most things of any consequence." At the physical level, through strength can it be seen who is superior, while at the mental one, 'tis not possible, which by itself should teach men something, which it does not. A man who some interested people believe to be a mystic one day said to them, "No one who's ever lived knew anything that you cannot know through the experience of that special state. Thus, the foolishness of listening to anyone else on the basis of them being a superhuman mystical master and you being a mere mortal, pathetic supplicant." A visit to that miraculous new area of consciousness tells you everything you ever wanted to know. The one realized we are all a walking around wondrous vacation just waiting to be discovered. End quote. One man began picking up a radio station that broadcast either only yesterday's news or else the imagined news of tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you what he finally discovered it to be. No. Our question for the day: if lions could think, in what ways would their lives be any better? There was once a man who searched for a mysterious secret city. He sought pertinent info as to its location from all available sources and drew up his own, most detailed and complex plans to find it. Then, after many years spent in the exploration, the data he had accumulated began to seem of less and less value, as likewise did the efficacy of his own contrived maps. But in that his interest and intelligence had in no way diminished since he started, he was faced with the possibility that something had been radically amiss from the very beginning. I relate this tale not to discourage, but to remind that nothing turns out exactly as the mind thinks. Even this. Even though a man can only walk where he walks, he can at all times be more aware of where his footsteps fall. One of humanity's grand illusions is that men need help. And perhaps the grandest of them all is that men can be. Yeah. For an ordinary man to speak of freedom is as foolish as for him to talk about what it means to be ordinary. A man who accepts consciousness to be that constant mental condition of his awareness being dragged along by whatever thoughts pass through him has not a complete understanding of the possibilities of consciousness, and it is almost impossible to make him even partially so advised. The allure of prayer is that it offers the ordinary about the only focusing of attention that they ever experience in what seems to be an intentional situation. One man's recent conclusion on a certain subject: the main problem with talk is that it is based on thought. After saying this, he grasped his forehead and stumbled away in silence. The reason that advice is a waste is that no one knows what works, except on them. Sometimes. Maybe. To try and cut down on repetitious action, one man's thoughts printed up some cards. And every time he had mentioned to them how little help they were, they'd hand him one of the cards that said, "So tell me something new." A new definition of mysticism. That singular human activity charged with the responsibility of taking something that can be described in 2 words and expanding it indefinitely. Travel, travel, travel. It seems that as long as Istanbul remains just out of sight, someone will always talk about it. And someone will always listen. There was also a people who claimed that man's original archetypical image of evil was not one of horned demons or a fallen angel, but of a hypnotist. And a rather indifferent, non-sinister one at that. Past a certain critical point, past a certain critical point, one can no longer ignore the fact that listening to anything else anyone says, reading what anyone else has written, watching what anyone else does, are each and all hindrances to the realization of your own consciousness. Targets change as the aim becomes clearer. One explorer's recent comment to a grandson: once you've seen the ocean without the waves and the sky without the noise, there's not much you can say about them after that. They spoke for themselves, and anything you might add is supremely superfluous and, in fact, embarrassing. The lad instantly realized that travel was clearly in his future. One of the bottom lines of activities such as this is that there is nothing wrong with your thinking, your state of mind, or your level of consciousness if you are satisfied with them. Case closed, nail shut, and shipped out. Bon voyage, all you expected. Conversion exhortations. Sidebar query: from what might life dissuade you and recruit you to what? For a man who wants control over his consciousness, all offers from ordinary people to help are a threat. One knight who undertook the quest for the great thing began believing he was to do battle with all of the king's forces, but then began to see it as a confrontation between him and just the king's personal guard. Then later still he saw it as a struggle between just him and the king. And after so narrowing it down, continued on in his efforts until his understanding became so refined that he could finally identify precisely the sole opposition to his desire. And it was not all of the king's armies, not his elite guard, and not even the king himself. No, the knight ultimately realized that all that stood between him and that for which he sought amounted to no more than everything in the universe. It's good for a player to finally learn the true odds of the game. And especially handy to discover how uncomplicated be the situation. And that all such activity as this always has been, still is, based entirely inside of one's head. Well, that it's inside of one and localized inside of one's head. And even though it is called by several names, more than is actually necessary, and yours truly not being exempt from adding there too, but what we're talking about, people can call it consciousness, mental processes, and of course in less specific, more simplistic milieux, they still refer to it as a spirit or a man's soul. It is simply operations of the brain, as it should be, obviously, evidently. Men take this to be of a singular importance, as distinguished from their other parts. We all know, if you stop for a second, you know it in theory, and you can know it by direct observation, that your heart is pounding. It's making enough noise that if you stop right now, you can hear it. It is continually contracting and releasing, pumping blood. Your lungs are going in and out. And those of you who have really wasted a lifetime in certain... I was going to make a side joke, but sometimes it becomes weird to even give the illusion of being funny because it's just an act. I was going to say some people who's wasted a lifetime in certain exotic metaphysical activities who can now, at times, they say, hear their liver work. I believe that's what they said. It was either that or something to do with a deli then and liverwurst, but anyway. All of this has to do with the operations of the brain. And to put one word which actually covers everything, it is simply thought. It's what man calls thought. And he gives it importance to the thing. He lends credence and significance far beyond any amount of minimal observation would support. So all this stuff about, again, I know that I do it sometimes just on a literary basis, rhetorical, grammatical basis, just so as to not continue to use the same word, to use them synonymously. But throughout history, they're used of ordinary people, and then they're used by that which presents itself publicly to be some transcendental activity wherein they place special importance on the ideas of consciousness. As I said, I'm not exempt. I'll even say things about a different state of consciousness, higher state of consciousness, stabilized state of consciousness, an individual state of consciousness, as opposed to your connection to the general, collective one of all of humanity. But all of this is talking about one simple thing. What is ordinarily called thoughts. It's the noise that the brain is making, and it's made it as long as you remember, and it'll make it up until the day you die if you're in the same general state of health as you are now. It is the thoughts are to the brain the thumping of the heart, the wheezing of the lungs, and whatever noise the liver makes for those who can hear it. I'm sure that some people who are partaken of demon rum, if not products of Anheuser-Busch, would just soon not hear what noises their liver might be making after all these years. Just a thought, I don't know. Maybe some things are best left unheard. Since it is all the state of enlightenment, all these other descriptions looked at a higher level assumed to be an awakening of consciousness, as it's called, or in other areas and times of the world, the liberation of the mind, or the liberation of consciousness. All of this is having to do with one thing: the operations of the brain. Whatever else you can call it that if you want to. But it is all something that occurs in the brain. That's it. I have a question for you. And as always, it's either much more complicated or even simpler than it first sounds. And we can explore both sides of it so that you see, hopefully, what I'm attempting to point at, and hopefully I won't say that anymore. What? Never mind. Since the grass is fairly high here on the savannah, perhaps we can slip up on it for a moment by using one of the news items tonight that said, it was presented as the query for the evening that asked, if a lion could think, in what way would its life be any better? That was a prelude. That was a sort of in-close body punch to try and soften you up for the real thing. The real thing is for you to ask yourself. It's a bit tricky to start with, but if you listen, you can hear what I'm pointing towards. Is to ask yourself right now, what you call thought, what ordinary people call thought, what you accept as being thought, and I'm not questioning that. It's the activity in your mind, in your brain. For those of you still squeamish, in your mind. In your brain, in your mind. If right now, not operating before the fact, not rewriting history, but if right now you were without what is normally what you consider to be thought, in what way would your life be adversely affected? The tricky part being that if you're just an ordinary run of mind, you won't follow any of this, and it's just insane. And some of you might at first try and discount it, that it must mean something else. No, we're not rewriting history. We're not saying if you had never started thinking, if you had never had the intellect ignited, which is possible, theoretically, that you or grew up in isolation, then what would apparently be an ordinary mind would be lacking in you. Not because of the environment, but it would be lacking in you. So we're not saying undo the mind. We're not saying undo what thought seems to give. And as a sidebar, do not get distracted. There are some people, many people nowadays, whose job, whose profession requires that you devote some thought to it. If you in any way are having to be, as they say, creative, that you're a programmer, almost anything, this side, well, I started to say this side of construction work, but even construction work, if you're anything other than a mail driver or a mud boy, you got to read any plans that you have to give any thought to something that you're faced with a situation that's at least partially beyond your past experience, that you have never seen how to put up a cornice board in a certain way, or you've never seen bricks laid in a particular pattern, and you have to look at it and think about it, or have to ask somebody. You have to use the mind specifically, that you have to think about something specifically. We'll skip that for the time being. I am talking about your everyday existence, driving your car to work, getting up in the morning. Take it from the time you wake up. The alarm goes off, the radio goes off, you raise up, you pull the covers off of you, reach over and you turn off the clock. You put your feet on the floor. You don't try to put them on the ceiling. If the air conditioner is right there on you, you turn it off. You don't have a list of things to do. You do all this. You go downstairs, you turn on the coffee, then you go in, perhaps turn on the hot water as you work, put the mouthwash in your mouth to get the water hot for the shower. All of these things. You fix some food, you fix some coffee, you work on a microwave, you do all of that. You put on your clothes, you feed the dog, you feed the cat, you turn out the lights, you turn off anything else in the house. You go out and you start the car. You pump the gas, you know how to get it started. If you got more than one car, some cars you've got to pump the gas, some you don't. Some start right up, some do not. You do all of that. You turn on the radio. You drive out of the driveway. We assume, glance around, see if traffic's coming. Somewhere you got to drive. The only reason that's funny is because it's not funny. You drive to work. You're on crowded side streets. You finally hit a freeway. Then you start doing 90 miles or 70 miles an hour, bumper to bumper, side by side to other people, just as mentally alert as you are. You drive to work. You may respond to some other driver, somebody, and you get to work. This might be another very likely one of the points between, not that it's necessary, but I'm saying this for another point, of whether a person would ever have any idea what this, not just me doing it, but what this activity has always been about, who just have no idea. They can hear it, and it just, the words make sense, the sentences and all that strange, but it is just absolutely beyond their comprehension. What the hell is this about? Here is another beautiful line of distinction, that it takes a minimal amount of some kind of awareness, some sort of intelligence that is non-standard. It has nothing to do with education, but it is just simply non-standard in few people for you to be able to hear what I'm about to point right at. And that is, again, we're not erasing your mind. That everything you learn, because your mind had to be involved, for instance, to learn how to drive a car. A lion would never learn to drive a car. A wolf, a chimpanzee can never learn, even if they learn how to steer the car. Some higher primates, you might get them in some sort of vehicle. That's likely, like a little bumper car, something that just runs, and you put them in there, and it just runs. And after some period of time, they very likely could learn that this directs their motion. You know, give them a little steering wheel, and they might be out in a big field, or, well, a few trees or little put-up man-made obstacles. They might, it's possible, learn to steer the thing. You understand? The same way that they learn to walk. But they would never learn to drive a car, because to learn how to shift the car, how to turn it on, was not simply a physical learning experience. It required some thought. So now we're not saying we're going back and erase everything you ever thought. I am saying today that everything that you've learned that even took thought to learn it, such as driving a car, it's still there. We're not erasing, we're not diminishing that any past learned abilities via thought. As Buddha would say, okay, all right. Or maybe that was Muhammad. All right? So you understand, we're not taking that away. You still have that. But now take that same scenario of your everyday existence that I did from waking up at the alarm. What additional, what advantage in that scenario I just described to you, getting to your job, of what advantage is what goes through your mind normally to that process? Now, today, an ordinary mind would dismiss that, and even those of you sharpest, since I'll assume, unless you've ever thought about it in particular this way yourself, you might be left with some degree of non-committed nonplusness. That is, that you don't reject it completely out of hand. But here it is. If you want to see, this might be an interesting, useful, and even surprising discovery for many of you, perhaps all of you in this particular way, is take it upon yourself to now try. Just try and remember that you're going to ask yourself a rhetorical question. Assume that on the way home, all of you who are driving, let's just take it that way. Somewhere between now, when we're through, and you driving home tonight, is try and remember to ask yourself the question, that there you are driving along, to try and remember what we're talking about right this second. And you go, oh yeah, right now, what advantage? Of course, those of you who are good at all, you got some glimpse there for a moment of thoughts running around the corner, you know, like a daytime dream, that it's so vivid until you wake up and you think, what did I just dream 30 seconds or 2 seconds ago? And it's gone. As you all know now, anytime you try to look at thought, it's like they're the supreme Venus arising. You know. They're so shy. Thoughts are so shy that all you got to do is look at them and they go, ooh. And they don't just cover themselves. They friggin' disappear. Well, they're degrees of coyness. Thoughts are the greatest. But at any rate, there you are driving home, let's assume tonight, and you remember this, and so you try, and you're trying to remember the question. Now I'm saying you could be, you know how given I am to understatement. It could be of extreme interest. It could be of surprising surprise. But there you are driving home tonight, and you remember this, that I was going to try and ask myself the question. He suggests I do it while driving home, of what thought, of what benefit right now, in what way is my life made more advantageous right this second by thought, by whatever I'm thinking. Of course, as soon as you think that, then you should, you try to look up and see Venus before she runs off. You try to look up to see what you were thinking. Now, why should I bore us and waste even 30 seconds with the kinds of things, you're either singing a song, you're repeating something I said tonight, or you're repeating something you just heard on the radio, or you're repeating something from yesterday, or you imagine what you're going to say to somebody, whatever it is. Of course, some of you may have much more grandiose and interesting thoughts than that. I seriously doubt it, but it's possible. Rather than just leave it rhetorically, here's what you're going to find. But you need to see it yourself, so I'm not spoiling the game to point it out. And most of you should know it right this second. You suddenly come to your senses. You become aware. You make yourself willfully aware to look at your thoughts, to become conscious of consciousness, which is it's the overblown way of putting it. You simply look at thoughts, which you don't normally do. Thoughts normally and you're dragged with them. But there you are driving, and you stop and you look at thoughts. I can tell you right now, whatever you were thinking, unless it was some absolute emergency, and we're not going to that, whatever you were thinking was not contributing one whit to what you were doing. Again, I want you to see, I'm playing both sides of this about how extremely interesting this can be once you realize it. Even though you may say, yeah, I hear what you're saying. You have to realize it. You have to experience it there in person. But let me switch it back for a second to where I was. Does everybody understand that an ordinary person listening to this will rightfully deny it? Let me do the ordinary person part. And they go, you're saying that if I'll notice what I'm thinking, say on the way home driving, that if I notice what I'm thinking, you're saying that it in no way is playing an advantageous role to what I'm doing. And if I said, yeah, that's about it, they'd go, well, if you mean that literally, you're nuts or something. Because if my mind, if I was not thinking, if I was not, that'd be like drifting off or maybe under the influence of booze or taking a nap. Your mind plays a critical, an integral part in everything I do. It did. It does sometimes. Like it did. They could say, you can't drive a car without being mentally alert. And we all know what they mean. You'd be a fool to go, yeah, you can. But now back to your side. Anybody who knows anything, you know this, you drive home. That's what you laughed 5 minutes ago. 75 miles an hour, side to side, bumper to bumper by other people, and all of you are in a stupor. Not one person is conscious by the definition of saying, are you conscious right now? And somebody go, that's all right. Do you drive a car? Do you walk around in that state? And of course you people know damn well you don't. That's what Buddha and Moses and Zoroaster and everybody else in this spent their whole life trying to do. They knew what it was. It's how can I keep it that way all the time? What did you just say? And Buddha went, well, I'm glad you asked. And realized, damn, I fell for it again. Ordinary people. I hope you didn't lose it. Ordinary people, if I said that whatever you're thinking while driving home tonight, anytime while you're driving, I'm just picking that because it seems to be it's a common activity, and it's one that is potentially dangerous. It's one that seems to require a kind of physical dexterity, a kind of alertness. And yet any of you who by now know anything, you know damn well you not only live your life, but you can drive, forget 75. Let's assume we're out the boondocks of Florida somewhere. Now you are doing 90 miles an hour, and you might as well be almost asleep. You might as well be in bed asleep. And you can still do it. And yet an ordinary person, if you said your thoughts, what you call thoughts, they go, yeah, is playing no advantageous role in you driving home tonight. And they go, well, you're crazy. If you mean that literally, you're crazy. And they're correct from that common view. But see, that's why I said we're not erasing the fact that the mind was necessary for you to learn to drive. But all it takes is this. It's not, I wouldn't preach to any ordinary person, as you know, I wouldn't even try to convince them. But all you've got to do is notice. Other than any job that, as I said, that you're specifically faced with having to come up with something creatively. The rest of the time, what are we talking about? 90% of your life. Just your everyday walking around existence. Walking, driving, your interpersonal relations, as they call it. Your conversations, your complete social life All you got to do is stop anywhere along the way, anytime you want to. Doesn't matter when. I just picked out driving. It just suddenly realized that there you are. You're talking to your boss after work. You're talking to some man or woman trying to pick them up. You're doing something that to you is extremely important, requires a certain perhaps bit of cunning, a certain bit of diplomacy. And if I said, all right, there you are talking to you went to lunch with your boss, and you're trying to finagle this new promotion, and yet you've always figured he was such a type that you shouldn't come right out and ask him, so you've got to get out and massage him. You've got to talk to him. You've got to work on his foibles. You already know what some of his hobbies are. So the whole thing requires a certain kind of mental dexterity. That's an ordinary person's view. And if I said, all you got to do is somewhere stop in the middle of this most important occasion. Now it's not physically driving, but it's your fiscal survival. Instead of your automotive handling skills to get you home physically alive, here you are, sitting at a table, trying to use the right fork, trying not to overeat, trying to remember not to eat grits with your fingers, trying to look intelligent, well, interested, if not intelligent, at things he has to say, laughing, you hope, in the right places. And if I said, become aware of what's going on in your mind, if you're aware of your thoughts, you would see that they are contributing nothing advantageous to what you're doing. Again, I repeat, if you said that to an ordinary person, and properly, you know this, they would go, if you mean that literally, you're crazy. Because if there would be one time that I would be mentally on my toes, would be then. Because I've been in that situation, they would say. And they'd say to me that you are crazy. You know, you must be brain damaged. I don't know how you live your life, because under that condition, I would be super alert. My mind would be what I was depending on. There is the difference. There is no theory. There is no sermon after this. It just shows us those people have not the least idea what life is about. They might as well be a slug. They might as well have never even raised the claim that, yes, I'm a human. Not from one view. Now, this is between you and I, because from a greater view, it's irrelevant. And it's not criticism of them. All it's showing is that they have not a whit of an idea of what goes on right here. Not theory, not something in a book. It doesn't require any education. All you got to do is want to, and do it a few times, and look up, and have the ability to just see. Because if they did, and there they were in this situation, back to the dinner with the boss, and you understand, their explanation, I could do it for them. I don't need them, I can do it. And them say, wait a minute, you are absolutely crazy. You are incorrect, because if there would be one time that I would be super alert, I would have planned this, I would have thought about it, I would have tried to even choreograph verbally how I wanted the conversation to go. I would have been so mentally alert that it would have been shocking. That's the level of awareness somewhere around a slug or a lion or a dog. Because all they would have to do, and it shows they never have and never will, and don't even have an idea of what I'm talking about. All the person would have to do in the middle of that is them saying, yes, I would be mentally alert, I would be super conscious of what was going on, etc. And all you'd have to do is suddenly try to come to your senses, to look at what was going on in your mind, that there you sit, perhaps in the middle of a sentence. That's almost impossible to do, I know. You just got through saying something, and it was your boss's turn. Him going, well, Jones, I'm glad you said that. And so you try to strike a pose, and you go, huh? And you suddenly remember, I was going to look at my thoughts, and you look at your thoughts. And what you've been doing, you just got through, you thought, making your greatest presentation of yourself, your verbal coup de grace of the day. And the boss goes, Jones, I am so, and you're suddenly aware of the fact, your thoughts, what you have just done. I'm not saying you didn't do a good job. You may get the promotion. All of that's irrelevant. But all you got to do is look at your thoughts, and you realize they were playing absolutely no part, none, in what you were doing. It's not a theory. Never has been a theory. It's not my theory. It is a fucking fact. And all you got to do is look. And there it is. Except, as we all know, no one will look. If you try to get anyway, nobody's going to look. Only you're either born, as the man said tonight, wanting to travel, or else you're not. And no amount of lecturing on the subject would change the situation one small bit. Can anybody just consider? Doesn't anybody get the joyful heebie-jeebies, as Brother Penniman used to say? Help him, Jesus. To consider the fact, I assume some of you already called on and you can sense it already, the reality of it, the absolutely unquestioned, unconditional validity of it. God, that's harsh to say. Let's go back to mine. If a lion could think, now if some of you got a little more than said part of that little one-liner, that a lion is still a lion. He's living his life. We're not taking a brand new lion. Let's take a nice grown lion. All right, there he is. We just find him laying out there in the grass. He just got a nice big bulge, wiping blood from his lips, and he rolls over on his back. If right then we've got a lion that can already lion it to the nth degree, he can lion it sufficient unto a lion. In other words, he's similar to my man. I said that when I said, asking you about what does thought play, we're not going back into racing. He has learned everything, quote, had all the experiences. He is a fully functioning lion. So there he is. We're not changing that. But if right now we hadn't turned him into anything other than a lion, but in addition to that, we have added thought. You understand? This is the other position of me saying this human driving home that is a fully functioning human, we extract thought. And I'm saying it would not make any difference. All right, let's turn it over because that sounds harsh, but you may just give you another glimpse. There's this lion. We're not distracting from his leontineness, if there is such a word, and who's going to know if there's not or not. We're not distracting at all from his lionness. But now, right here, in the middle of his life, in addition to his lionness, we add on the ability to think. The question was, in what ways would his life improve? Now I'll go ahead and answer it for you if you're following this. None. He has already done. He's proved. He has lived a lion's life. If he is alive, then he is extracting on a continual basis every possible morsel of nourishment, joy, and pleasure of being a lion that's possible. We all know that. You do not see animals. You do not see any creature sans the ability to think ever pacing the jungle, the floor, with any look on their face like, God, I was so close. You never see elephants get through mating, and one of them look like they want to break into a Peggy Lee song and sing, "Is that all there is?" You never see a tiger get through eating a nice big side of a gazelle. They're laying there eating part of it and kind of look up. You never see and them looking like, God, I'm sick of meat. Or you never see a dog after his 127th nap of the day kind of stretch himself and look up like, is this what life amounts to? Just sleep? The only reason you're laughing, or the reason you're laughing again, is not because it's funny. So do you see from the other view, which may not be as harsh to the ear to start with, a lion, if we were not erasing any part of his past, we're not distracting, we're not subtracting any lionness from him. But if right now, in addition to his fully functioning lionness, we added the ability to have thoughts, what would they add to his life? And the answer is nothing. They could not add anything because nothing is lacking. If you start noticing, and again, if you have the ability to make use of it, talking to your boss, from that to driving a car to just sitting at home, just every day doing nothing, which is what most people do. Dogs, it's more obvious, they nap. People sit up with their eyes still open all day. But all you've got to do is start noticing in whatever activity you are apparently involved. And if you were just sitting there in a chair, an ordinary, educated, sophisticated, reasonable, civilized person, if right now, if in some way you could be a supernatural spirit and suddenly appear in their room. Let's assume you're just sitting, staring out the window. Maybe you got TV turned on, the radio, and you're just kind of staring at the wall, and you've been sitting there, and suddenly this spirit shows up and says, "What do you call yourself doing?" Which is Southern mystical talk for what's happening. What you call yourself doing? And you can think, well, now compared to what you were talking about last night, let's say it was the spirit of me, to give this some apparent continuity. And you can say, well, I'm not, as you said last night, I'm not actually here interacting with someone else, like the scenario of my boss and myself, and I'm not out driving a car, I'm not physically apparently doing anything. But if I said, well, are you just sitting there like in a stupor or a dream? Did you cease to exist just because you're not physically active, that you're just sitting there? And an ordinary person, again, as they should, there's nothing wrong with the response, but they would say, you would say, if you were caught flat-footed and couldn't realize what was going on, you would want to say something like, well, no, I was thinking about something. And that's the common response. If you go, really? And you go, well, yeah. Of course, if I was an idiot, or I'll carry on with this and say, well, would you be so kind as to, would you tell me what you were thinking about? You know damn well, you and everyone else that is mentally sound at all from an ordinary view, you'd immediately go, oh, well, and this may or may not have anything to do with what you were thinking, which again is irrelevant. Absolutely meaningless, moot. Which, as one of the news stories tonight said, that alone should teach men something, which it doesn't. But if I said, well, I just saw you sitting there. I was just floating overhead and I saw you sitting here and I was interested. And you've just been sitting there motionless for the last 3 or 4 minutes, more or less a little fidgeting. I just wondered what you were doing. Whether you were asleep or passed out. And you go, oh, no, I was thinking about something. Again, this is not the point, but I'll throw it in. If I said, well, what? I'm just curious. What were you thinking about? You and everyone else, every mentally ordinary person will go, oh, and you'd say something like, well, I was thinking about that tomorrow I have to go to the doctor. Or I was thinking about, if you had the TV on, you might be saying, well, I was thinking again how crummy TV is, and why don't they come up with a new show? You would say something. You know you would. And that's not even getting into the fact that it very likely would have no relationship to what you were just thinking. Well, you know this by now, if you know anything, that rather than me do it that way, if I just suddenly popped in and I appeared in your room and there you'd been sitting just staring at the window or at the wall or at the TV, and I said, I know you've been motionless, and I wondered what was going on. Well, you're all right? And you went, yeah, you're right. I was thinking about something. And I said, well, tell me, I'm curious. I just doing a survey. Just before I popped in on you and brought you out of it, just 2 seconds ago, you went, yeah. Literally, what were you thinking just then? You know damn well, under ordinary conditions, you could not tell. That will not stop the mind and the tongue from doing so. Back to it. It does not matter whether you're actually engaged in some physical behavior, such as driving a car, or just sitting there. Sitting there seems of less significance, and it seems less vivid when I talk about it. But whatever you're doing, you're alive, there you sit, you're a human, you're breathing, you supposedly have some plans in life, some interest in life, and there you sit, either that or actually out involved in something that apparently that does require physical activity, such as driving the car, requires mental activity and physical, such as talking to your boss, making the right gestures, using the right, your entire existence. And all you got to do is stop at any given moment and look at what the thoughts running through your mind. They are contributing nothing of a constructive nature. It's very likely they have almost nothing to do. It's just like little glancing blows that just, like they constantly look up just for a second, just to be aware of what's going on, so that you're not in the middle of there talking to your boss and suddenly your mind, you begin to tell, you know that he's a Catholic, and suddenly your mouth begins to tell, oh, I heard this great Catholic joke, and you begin to tell anti-clerical humor, or notice he's wearing a toupee and begin to the string of jokes about bad hair pieces. It's like thought we'll just continue to glance to make sure that what's coming out the mouth and the gestures bear a non-harmful relationship to the environment. I'll put it that way. It's like you can drive along in a stupor, but even the body itself requires that the mind, the eyesight, which is tied to the mind since in man's case. Anyway, it's like you will continue to just glance. But what you're going to find is, all you got to do is start looking. Start asking yourself, just remember, take it again, as always, a challenge. Look and see how incorrect I could be. That whatever you're doing is just stop. Just grab yourself right quick and just look. What am I thinking? And there's no doubt once you see it. You've got to see it. You may verbally already agree with it. But as you know by now, it has no relationship. It doesn't begin to give you what to experience, to actually see it. And just one or two times may not give you that full blast, that full burst of joyful flavor that will fill your little mind and soul and mouth with. I'm lapsing back into advertising. I keep forgetting I'm not writing jingles anymore. Well, for a living. Commercially. As you look up and you realize there's no doubt your thoughts are contributing nothing advantageously to what you're doing. All right. I skipped, you notice tonight, of me suggesting and all that. I'm telling you, they do not. So now you're left with this. Let's assume that you've done this a number of times, that it's no longer in any question. And of course, as always, just because you've done it a number of times and you see it clearly without any doubt, there's no question about it, it's just a fact. That you find yourself in a variety of situations. And that can be quite complex from any ordinary view, challenging, potentially dangerous. That about covers it, but you look up and it's things that only humans do. And then on the surface, if you heard the idea that what you think normally is in no way advantageous, adds nothing to what you're doing, and you hear that, and the mind, and any sane person would go, that's crazy. Maybe you're talking about somebody that lives a bucolic life as a hermit. Maybe you're talking about somebody that lives in a cave and eats berries. But my God, I'm an accountant. I'm an attorney. I'm a brain surgeon. And I'm an accountant on the weekends. I do my own taxes. The mind rightfully, and any sane ordinary person would rightfully dismiss that out of hand. And yet you will find, I'm just telling you, you will find, if you can see it, that no matter what you're doing, other than, as I said, specific examples of where you're having to apply your mind, and it normally occurs with most people only at their job, and then it's just momentary flashes. It's just to do what they have to do to try to come up with a new way to make this fit, some new program, we've got to make it do this and that, and somebody has to figure, and they have to really think. But other than that, just discounting that, which is not a person's, that is not the entirety of their existence. It does not begin to represent it. The rest of it, the kinds of things that keeps you apparently physically safe, such as driving, the kinds of things necessary to get you to your job, as I described, of being able to make coffee, or at least put on your clothes. If not drive a car, be able to walk to the corner and know a bus when you see one. And don't mistake a boulder for a bus. You get on one going to the right place. All of this seems like any doubt the mind would say to me that I'm an idiot. The whole idea is insane, that thought is the backbone. It is the focus. It is the linchpin to being able to survive in a contemporary, complex world. I know it sounds right until you look. And all you got to do is look. And there you are in something very important, and you look at the thoughts in your mind, and there's no doubt they are contributing nothing. They probably don't have any relationship to what you're doing. Assuming that you have done that a variety of times, and it's no longer a doubt. And it's not the number of times that do it, it's whether you're wired up, born wanting to travel, and begin to realize and see what life's about. At any rate, we'll assume that you now know this without any doubt. It's not that you don't lapse back into it. Everyone does. But you know without any doubt that if I suddenly said, hey, have you been trying to think about looking whether your thoughts contribute? You go, you don't even finish. You say, hey, God, it's weird. It's shocking. I couldn't believe it. All right, so you know it through experience. Then you're left, here's an interesting question you can do as you drive along to give you something new to do rather than just look at thoughts. Since you now know that anytime I look, I know what it's going to be. It's going to be irrelevant to whatever I'm doing. Well, here's your new one to do while driving, in case nothing good's on the radio. It's to ask yourself this. It's very simple. You have now had enough experience, and you know that anytime, with very minor, specific, recognizable, even predictable exceptions, as I mentioned about certain kinds of activities that require specific intellectual creativity and originality. Other than those few things, the rest of the time you know by now, anytime you look at your mind, that what's going through your thoughts, you can look at them, and your thoughts are contributing nothing advantageously to what you're doing. Nothing. You know that. Here's your new hobby, a new question. Very simple, and it's as serious. This is not, I'm not ending on a sarcastic note. Is you then have a new interesting question. Again, we're not trying to go backwards and undo the mind. You can't. That's not the purpose. You're not erasing any part of your past. You're now up to the moment. You're contemporaneous with what my description. You're living in real time, and you're driving, and you now know what I'm talking about. That any time you look at your thoughts, they are not contributing anything advantageous to what you're doing. They're certainly not critical, as you would have thought before you ever get involved with looking at them, if you have the ability to see what I'm talking about. They're not only not critical, they're not even advantageous, and very likely are bearing no relationship to what you're doing. So here's your new hobby. Here's your new question. Not hobby, here's your new question. Is ask yourself now, of what use is or are my thoughts to me? Drive on, as that other famous philosopher McKinley Morganfield would say, drive on, little honeybee, drive on.